What's up guys, Michael Kamalo here, aka Dr. Gaines, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to build and strengthen all 8 forearm flexors using the single best science-based exercise technique developed exclusively for that purpose, including both cable and free weight versions of that exercise. But first, for some quick context, why should you care about working them in the first place? Well, I'll give you just 5 quick reasons. Number 1, the forearm flexors make up the majority of the entire forearm, and they make you look ripped when they are built. 2, developed forearm flexors give you a strong, firm handshake, which subconsciously conveys strength, confidence, and reliability to those that you meet. 3, they are the single most used skeletal muscle group in modern society. 4, virtually every pull exercise that exists to work your back, shoulders, legs, biceps, etc. relies on your grip strength, and about 80% of your grip strength comes from your forearm flexors, with the remaining 20% coming from the forearm extensors, which I went over in a previous video. So how well you can work a huge portion of the rest of your body is limited by the strength of your forearm flexors. 5, due to a principle called muscular irradiation, the stronger your forearm flexors are, the better you'll be able to work your upper arm muscles, including the biceps, triceps, and deltoids. The list goes on, but some of you may ask, well, aren't they getting worked enough by gripping those weights and all of those pull exercises? And the answer is no, they are not, because of 2 different things. First, in all those exercises, the forearm flexors are only being worked isometrically, which means the muscle fibers are not contracting and extending, they're staying still. They're not moving the load at all, and isometric contractions are the least effective of the 3 types for stimulating muscle growth. And second, in all those exercises, grip work is only engaging the finger flexors and not working the wrist flexors at all, which make up half of the forearm flexors as a whole. So you need to incorporate exercises where the forearm flexors are being isolated via direct concentric and eccentric contractions, and that target both the finger flexors and wrist flexors. And here's the multi-phase technique I developed for doing exactly that. For the cable version of this exercise, you'll kneel to the side of an inclined bench that's positioned a couple feet to the side of a low set cable and far enough in front of the cable that there's constant tension on the forearm. Then support the back of your forearm against the bench, which will remove any tension from your back and shoulders and fully isolate the forearm flexors. From that position, you'll use a 2-part motion. First, you'll let the cable hyperextend your wrist so that it's bent backwards and let the handle uncurl your fingers. It's extremely important here that you let it drop all the way down to your fingertips, or the 3rd digits, and you'll see why when I go over the anatomy here in a minute. So let the handle down as far as you can without dropping the weight. Then slowly flex your fingers back, curling the handle in until you've made a fist, and that ends the first phase. From there, you'll move into the second phase by flexing your wrist while simultaneously adducting it or rotating it slightly in towards the pinky side of your hand. Again, you'll understand why that makes a big difference when we analyze the anatomy. Then slowly let the cable pull your wrist back to the starting position, which ends the second phase, and repeat. One variation you'll want to add to this exercise is to rotate your body towards the side that you're working. That will make more of a direct line from your forearm to the cable, which will shift the point of max resistance on the wrist flexors from between a neutral position to a fully flexed position. Whereas in the first position I showed you, where you're rotated away from the side that you're working, the point of max resistance on the wrist flexors is from between a hyperextended position to a neutral position. Rotating between the 2 different angles of resistance will do a better job of stimulating balanced muscle growth due to the principle of non-homogeneous hypertrophy. Now, most people's wrist flexors will actually be stronger than their finger flexors, so I also add a 2-part double failure finisher to the end of this exercise. First, you'll perform only the finger flexion phase until you hit failure with those, and then you'll perform only the wrist flexion and adduction phase until you hit failure a second time. That way you're getting the most out of both groups of flexors, regardless of any strength differential between the 2. For the free weight version of this exercise, you'll sit on a bench and lean over slightly with the back of your forearm supported by your thigh. From there, you'll use the same 2-phase technique. First, let the weight hyperextend your wrist or bend it back, and let the handle drop down to the very end of your fingertips. Then curl your fingers back in until you've made a fist. Second, flex your wrist while slightly adducting it, then let it drop back to a neutral position and repeat. And with the free weight version, you can add the same 2-part finisher, starting with only the finger flexion phase until failure, then moving to only the wrist flexion and adduction phase until failure again. This seated position places the point of max resistance on the wrist flexors from between a hyperextended position to a neutral position, but just like with the cable version, you can change that up. in this case by standing up. Again, this lines up your forearm with the resistance gravity, which shifts the point of max resistance on the wrist flexors to between a neutral position and a fully flexed position. And just like with the cable version, rotating between the two positions will do the best job of maximizing balanced muscle growth. Now, to get the most out of this exercise and to be able to modify it to fit your own needs and goals, it's essential that you understand the anatomy behind what makes this exercise technique so effective. Remember that the forearm flexors can be broken down functionally into two basic categories, those that flex the fingers and those that flex the wrist. Those that flex the fingers are the flexor pollicis longus, flexor pollicis brevis, flexor digitorum profundus, and flexor digitorum superficialis. In anatomical terms, pollicis refers to the thumb and digitorum refers to the other four fingers. However, the flexor digitorum muscles are about 15 times the size of the pollicis muscles and are actually the largest muscles in the entire forearm, including the extensors, so they'll give you the largest bang for your buck, and they're the ones that we're going to focus on here. Both flexor digitorum muscles originate from up near the elbow and then insert on the front of the fingers, so when they contract, they curl the fingers in. However, exactly where on the fingers they insert is extremely important. Superficialis inserts on the proximal and middle phalanges, or the first and second segments of the fingers. However, profundus only inserts on the distal phalanges, or the very last segment of the fingers. And that is why in my exercise, I stressed the importance of letting the weight drop all the way down to your fingertips in order to get maximum engagement of flexor digitorum profundus. The weight has to be directly on the final segment of the phalanges. And we're not talking about a trivial difference here. Flexor digitorum profundus is by far the single largest forearm muscle, larger even than the brachioradialis. So making sure that you effectively target it will yield the largest results. So the first phase of this exercise targets the finger flexors by adding direct resistance to curling your fingers in. But that still leaves the wrist flexors, which is where phase 2 comes in. The wrist flexors are the abductor pollicis longus, flexor carpi ulnaris, palmaris longus, and flexor carpi radialis. As an interesting side note, roughly 15% of the world's population actually do not have the palmaris longus muscle. One way to test whether you have it is to flex your wrist and then touch your thumb and pinky together. If you have it, you will see a tendon pop out across the front of your wrist. If you don't, you won't see it. I actually have it in my left arm, but not in my right. But luckily, it's small enough that functionally it doesn't make a difference whether you have it or not. Regardless, each of the wrist flexors originate somewhere up near the elbow and then cross the front of the wrist to insert on the base of the hand on what are called the carpals and metacarpals. So when they contract, they bend the wrist forward. However, some of the wrist flexors are better at taking the wrist from a hyperextended position back to a neutral position, while others are better at taking it from a neutral position to a fully flexed position. And that is why in my exercise, I work both ranges of motion by adjusting the angle of resistance. Finally, remember that I told you to add an aspect of adduction to the wrist flexion phase of the exercise by rotating your hand towards the pinky side. That adduction serves 3 different purposes. First, you actually cannot get full flexion of the wrist without adduction. Go ahead and try it yourself. If you try to bend your wrist forward while keeping it completely straight, you will not be able to bend it as far as if you also rotate it or adduct it. So by adding that aspect of adduction, we're actually ensuring maximum flexion of the wrist flexor muscles. Second, the largest of the wrist flexors, flexor carpi ulnaris, actually also performs adduction because of its insertion point on the pinky side of the hand. So adding an aspect of adduction ensures that you're hitting it fully as well. Finally, adding even a slight amount of adduction changes up the resistance angle enough to add resistance against pronation, which means to rotate your forearm over in that same direction. And that will hit the last 2 muscles in the anterior compartment of the forearm, the pronator teres and pronator quadratus, which, as per their names, pronate the forearm. And again, this isn't a meaningless difference, even though it's a slight change. Pronator teres is actually one of the larger muscles in the forearms, larger even than flexor carpi ulnaris. So by engaging it, you are making a significant difference in the efficacy of the exercise. If you missed part 1 and 2 of this forearm series where I went over the brachialis and the forearm extensors, I will link those videos in the video description below. But if you really want to know how to successfully integrate these techniques into a complete forearm building regimen that effectively targets all 19 forearm muscles, I am very close to finishing the Hypertrophy Series Total Forearm Program, which does exactly that. And I'll include a link in the video description below you can use to add your name to a notification list to beta test the Total Forearm Program before it's released in return for a 50% discount. In the meantime, there is a significant amount of forearm work in my Hypertrophy Series Bicep and Tricep program, which is available now, and I'll also link in the video description below. And if you want more free science-based health and fitness content, you'll want to subscribe to Fitness Tip Friday, my email newsletter that is always short, significant, and science-based, and also includes motivational quotes and exclusive deals, bringing a huge amount of value to you in a bite-sized package once a week that won't clutter your inbox and has become one of the most popular things I do. And I'll link that in the video description as well. Either way, be sure to subscribe and turn on those post notifications so that you don't miss any of my future videos. And if you liked this one, please hit that like button. Let me know what you thought in the comment section below and what you would like to see in the future. And if you haven't yet, be sure to follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Michael_Kamalu for more content. Mahalo, my friends. Until next time.